Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the boy in the team in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Yell Not Your Sorrows. Lies fill the world. Masks placed on faces smile and laugh to tasteless jokes. Grim-looking grimaces hide behind tightly lipped smiles. She stood hidden beneath a tall and leafy branch, holding on with chakra slightly coating the underside of her thumbs. People smiled and called her a hero, before whispering behind her back with venomous words filled with jealousy. She carefully closed her eyes, letting the noises of the forest slowly drift away from her ears. She was looking for the other noises: a breaking twig, a light breath, fabric rubbing against skin. Nariko liked this, the light thrill of being the hunter and the hunted, in a sort of eternal swap between prey and predator. She could see Kakashi in her mind, squatting and making his steady way towards her while avoiding the traps she had carefully placed. She had asked why the Kyuubi was in her. Her mother hadn't answered. Her father had grimaced and looked away. Quietly, Nariko tensed her fingers around a steel wire. She could swear Kakashi Nii was slowly creeping forward, trying to reach her position. He'd probably be any second now from jumping down on her, trying to place a kunai to her throat. She had heard Sasuke fighting off Kakashi. She didn't understand Yuki-chan's objection to using his Sharingan. If she had eyes like those, she'd use them to begin with, and really, how cool was it to simply have to point the eye at someone to get them in a genjutsu? It was easy to see the benefits of being a golden cage. The problem was that all cages hang from a hook. She flexed the steel wire a second later. Kakashi came down from above her, ready to slam a kunai in her back, metaphorically, of course. She doubted Kakashi Nii would actually deliver the blow. Nariko's cage bunshin disappeared in a puff of smoke, replaced with a trunk of explosives as the rest of the traps sprung one after the other. Her real self exhaled in relief, before giving a nod to her other 4 clones. They dashed into action then, explosive tags primed to their bodies. The first clone exploded in a flash when a kunai struck its neck, covering the advance of the other 3. She knew Kakashi had avoided the trap, it was obvious, really, so she knew he'd be ready for another strike. She had no time for friends. She had to learn to control her power after all. The second clone avoided a volley of Senbon needles, but fell prey to an explosive tag on a nearby branch. The subsequent explosion leveled the tree, leaving behind but a scorched stump. She couldn't trust those smiles, because half hid jealousy, and half hid greed. The third clone found itself struck by a shuriken in the left eye, exploding in the middle of a clearing. She was the center of everyone's attention, yet they kept her at an arm's length. The fourth clone chose to self-detonate in the end, letting the tags run their course. After all, there did not exist a jail that couldn't be breached. She hissed in frustration as she moved away from the spot, the noise of the explosion covering her footsteps. She unclasped a bundle of steel wire, tying one extremity to a kunai. She flung the weapon against the nearest tree, before planting a set of explosive tags on the wire and jumping down. Her hand held onto the wire, before her ears picked up the noise of a branch breaking. She sent chakra through the wire, not wasting a moment of time, and twisting her body in midair ready to strike. Of course, Kakashi hadn't followed her in a straight line, so her twisting did nothing but allow him to hit her on the side with a punch. She groaned in frustration, feeling her body pushed back in midair. She flexed her legs to land on a nearby trunk, before jumping back in the fray, kunai glinting in hand. It hit with a metallic thunk Kakashi's, before she continued her flight, landing on the next tree. A volley of shurikens nearly hit her, making her gasp and lose her bearings for a single second. In that second, Kakashi flickered right next to her and gripped her by the neck. Kakashi slammed her down on the ground hard, before a kunai plunged deep in her stomach. She screamed in pain, blood seeping out of her mouth. Arg. Ka. The next, she cursed her very self. Kai. The illusion disappeared, but by then it was too late. She stood tied to the central wooden pole, with Kakashi in front of her smiling widely. Too late. Kakashi smiled brightly. Really, he shook his head. You were supposed to do it the moment we exchanged glances. I wasn't staring at you. Nariko groaned. Come on. And why am I the only one tied? Well, somebody unearthed my Uchiha plant, Kakashi remarked. So I'm waiting until someone decides to try and save you. If one of you fail, you all fail after all. That's what being a team is about. Nariko sulked. That's unfair. Well, then just free yourself. Nariko narrowed her eyes to slits. You placed something on the back of the wood pole, didn't you? I might have asked something of the sort, maybe, Kakashi acquiesced. It's sort of the tradition, you know? Someone always gets tied to the pole. And I had to be tied to it because… it felt right. Kakashi shrugged and returned to his orange-covered book. Gah. Come on. Yuki-chan. Where the hell are you? Come and free me please. Kakashi nii is being mean. There was a nervous call-out, which actually made Kakashi stare at the completely visible, outright in plain sight and without even a weapon out Shinku Harano. I had a question. You understand this is survival training, Kakashi retorted. Yes, but isn't the clock broken? Kakashi smiled. Oh? Nope, doesn't seem like it. But there's the shadow, right? Doesn't it, Mark? Kakashi threw the kunai, which slammed against the ground, a few inches away from Shinku's feet. The boy yelped as he made a frightened jump backwards, from behind the wooden poles. The Shinku speaking with Kakashi charged ahead then, while the real one exhaled and made a break for the pole. Watch out, there might be a flash of light, a light pressure against his chest, and Shinku ended up rolling on the ground as the pole exploded outwardly. Trap, Nariko finished lamely. She dusted off the shards of wood from her shoulders, breathing in deeply. Now my jacket's ruined, she mumbled. Her back felt slightly cold, but she supposed it had simply to do with being sticky with sweat. Shinku, on the other hand, opened his eyes blearily. He had a kunai stuck in his left shoulder. Frowning, he slowly grabbed and pulled the weapon free. The tip was red. Oh. He stumbled back on his feet a moment later. It didn't actually hurt, then again his head was ringing. His eyes moved towards Nariko, who appeared none the worse than before, since the trap was probably aimed towards a would-be rescuer coming from the back and then towards Sasuke. The silver-haired Jounin was easily fighting off the Uchiha, without even breaking a sweat. "Ohi, you all right?" Nariko asked, moving closer. "Ah, yes," he answered. "Aren't you bleeding?" "I don't even feel it," he mumbled back. "You're probably in shock," Nariko nodded. "Just don't worry. I'll go and help Yuki-chan. You try and find a moment to come on in from the back and we'll be all set." Shinku nodded numbly. He didn't actually feel pain. Even his fingers, which were hurting like hell before, now didn't hurt him at all. If being in shock was about being pain-ridden, then it was a wonderful feeling. "Ohi, snap out of it soon." Nariko snapped her fingers in front of his face. "I said, do you have explosive tags?" He shook his head. "Ninja wire?" He shook his head again. "A kunai?" He offered his own. "You realize that makes you weaponless?" He frowned, before nodding. "I'll just have to go with my taijutsu then." He just numbly nodded back again. It was starting to piss her off. Nariko would have much liked to slam her teammate's head on the ground by then, but that wouldn't have shown teamwork at all. Well, he was the dead last of the class in the end. She grumbled, before conjuring a couple of clones. "Keep an eye out on him before he falls dead or something." The clones nodded, and then she was off. "Ohi, boss." One of the clones yelled. "What?" she asked. "You're back. You're bleeding." "Just a flesh wound." With that said, she dashed back in the middle of things. Really, what was her father thinking, putting in her team someone who couldn't even stand the sight of his own blood? Chapter 7, Only Silence. Kakashi exhaled. He really had no ground whatsoever to fail the team. Unfortunate as it was, his days as a freeloader at Sensei's house were about to end, as he would return to active duty as a Jounin Sensei. He just wanted to check one last thing, but that was something he'd have to ask to the Hokage privately. Parrying another blow, he finally called the survival training off. He clapped his hands. "Very well, you all pass. Congratulations, we are now Team 7 officially." Who would have thought about that? He rolled his visible eye. Now, I'll bring the form to the Hokage. You lot are dismissed for today. See you tomorrow at 7 o'clock right here. Hey! Naruko exclaimed, what about the bell test? Maybe another day, he shrugged, when you don't have to carry one of your teammates to the hospital. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. The dead last managed to get wounded? I even gave him the easy task, grumbling. The Uchiha gave a look behind Kakashi's back and then sighed. How long is he going to stare? Kakashi just shrugged, before disappearing in a flicker. That did serve to wake Shinku up, as he slowly began to walk forward while Naruko's clones dispersed. Has he even been wounded before? Naruko muttered under breath. Really, I knew we had to deal with the dead last, but I expected something better, Dadabiya. Pipe down, Sasuke retorted. At least he tries, and he hasn't called me Uchiha-sama once yet. I think he hasn't called any of us once yet, Naruko replied in a low whisper, and then she smiled. Well, Shin-chan. We passed Tabiya. How about we all go and celebrate at Ichiraku? Dope, he has to go to the hospital, Sasuke stressed out. Food can wait, and aren't you wounded too? Mine's already healed, Naruko shrugged. Fuzzy butt and all, you know. You can rip my chest apart and I'll be as good as new the next day. You think I can also bash your brain and have him repair it? Sasuke quipped back, because we can experiment in making you smarter, if you like. Ohi, Yuki-chan, Naruko heatedly replied, you want to go at it? As the two bantered on, completely ignoring Shinku's presence, the boy whispered. Well, I'll go to the hospital, then, bye. With that murmured last word, and without even receiving a reply, he began to walk away. That's like kicking a puppy, Sasuke stated plainly, as he watched Shinku's back further away and already disappearing from sight. I hope you know that. You can't just trust people like that, Naruko retorted. The shy and meek type is just another mask. I told you he hasn't called me Uchiha-sama once. Means nothing, Naruko huffed, crossing her arms over her chest. My jacket's all ripped too, and I was trying to tell him about the trap to begin with. Now that's just being mean, Sasuke pointed out. You can't expect someone fresh out of the academy dead last or not to know about seals. Heck, there isn't a Fuinjutsu course to begin with. Still, I'm not trusting him more than I can keep an eye on him, Naruko replied. Do as you wish, Dobe, the raven-haired Uchiha said, shaking his head. Let's go get your daily dose of ramen, so you'll be quiet for a while at least. Hey. You're making it sound like a bad thing. Kakashi Hatake glanced warily at the list of exams. You understand why he's in the team now. Minato Namikaze replied with ease, while calmly scribbling down on the paperwork the mortal foe of all Hokage. I actually don't understand what I'm seeing, Kakashi replied. The votes are, well, borderline passing, which makes sense for the dead last, with a light increase towards the end. Yes, but look at the votes of everyone else, Minato stressed out, except the clan children I mean. Kakashi did just so, and he closed his eye calmly. In the last months, they've all taken lower and lower scores. Yes, they all purposefully and badly at that failed the last of their written tests. They probably knew about the tradition of placing the dead last with the Rookie of the Year and the first Kunoichi. Considering whom they were, the risk of flunking the academy seemed minor compared to the chance of being in their team. So, Shinku Harano didn't? Nobody else told him. Minato shrugged. Maybe they did and he didn't care, or maybe he actually didn't want to be in the team. I remember my sensei telling me of what hell it was, to be in a team with prodigies. He had pretty much the same situation, with Orochimaru and Tsunade both being Rookie of the Year and the granddaughter of the first Hokage respectively. Should I do anything in particular about it? Kakashi asked. Train him specifically or something else? No, nothing of the sorts, Minato shook his head, just let him be. I'm hoping he might have a stabilizing effect on the other two, however, what with his completely normal background. If it's too much of a hassle, I'll ask sensei how the sand aim worked out with it, but I trust you with my daughter's future as a kunoichi, Kakashi. I hope you understand I wouldn't give her training in the hands of anyone else. Kakashi nodded. Also, Minato continued, I hope you understand that Jounin-sensei are tasked with protecting their students. I don't care if someone makes the puppy eyes and Nariko suddenly decides she wants to help. If that someone even slightly smells of dirt, mist, lightning, or even sand, I want you to call the mission off. Understood? Yes, sensei, Kakashi replied. I know what I'm doing. Good, or I'm unleashing Kushina on you, Minato nodded sagely as Kakashi shuddered. You're dismissed. Kakashi disappeared in a flicker the next moment. Shinka was waiting in the lobby. His brain was sort of telling him that if he had a wound on the shoulder, then he shouldn't be waiting for his turn like someone with just a toothache. The problem was he didn't even feel like talking to the nurse for fear of his voice cracking. He had been outright useless, no, even worse than that. After the outright horrible way he had gone through the survival training, he was surprised they had simply chosen to ignore him. Maybe they just expected him to shrug it off as the Yondame's daughter had done. Still, the sensei had said to go to the hospital, so there he was. Alone, of course. His number came up after a good half an hour. His stomach was grumbling, but at least during the lunch break there weren't many people in line. The nurse pointed him to a room where he entered, and after sitting down on the white paper sheet so common on the hospital's examining beds, he waited once more. 15 minutes later, the doctor arrived. What seems to be the problem? The man asked, looking towards his shoulder before replying. Hurt your shoulder? I had a training accident, Shinka replied. I lost the grip on my kunai when something exploded in front of me, and so it ended up in my shoulder. Now that's being an unlucky bastard, the man replied with a light chuckle. Well, show the wound then. I still haven't learned how to give stitches through clothes. Shinka removed his jacket and then his shirt, wincing as he felt the pain flare through his shoulders area from the movement. Oh boy, you should thank your jacket, the medic remarked casually as he examined the wound. I'll clean the wound up right away. You came in here with someone? No, Shinka replied. They all had something else to do. The medic cleaned the wound quietly after that, as all conversation died out. Shinka hissed, gritting his teeth as the man stitched the wound up and then placed some gauze over it. There you go, he added. It was just a flesh wound, but I'm sure it gave you quite the scare. It's always like that with you kids. The moment they give you weapons you just don't realize what they are until you get wounded once. The lucky ones are wounded on the training grounds, he patted gently Shinku on his good shoulder. You're not the first I'm patching up today. You passed your Jounin's test. Shinku nodded numbly. Well, good for you then, the man then gestured for him to get down from the bed. You're free to go. Ah, thank you, Shinku bowed, and then left, his jacket beneath his arm. His stomach growled, but he just walked forward. It was no use trying to go to Ichiraku Ramen, where his two teammates probably were. He understood the message just fine. He wasn't wanted in their prodigy world. Unfortunately, he'd have to stay with them for a while. Really, he had all the luck in the world. The door of his house opened, and he stepped inside to the silence once more. It was so quiet, and his stomach grumbled more. For once, he was glad for the pre-cooked food his mother left for him on the kitchen's table. He just had to heat the stuff for a little less than a minute before it became edible. Therefore, it was that he sat down at the empty kitchen table, a heated plate of food in front of him, and in the silent house, he began to eat. Alone. Chapter 8, Meaningful Silences. His shoulder itched. It was nothing worthy of note, he supposed all wounds itched. At 7 o'clock, he once more stood in front of the wooden pole of Training Ground 7. Sasuke Uchiha was already there, and with a curt nod of his head, they both began to wait in silence. Your parents have a bakery, right? Sasuke asked suddenly, making Shinku frown. Why yes, he replied. Silence fell once more in the clearing. The river's water flowed by with ease behind them, as the crickets sang and the leaves atop the branches bristled beneath the wind. Sasuke tapped his right foot on the ground once. And they're both civilians, the Uchiha added again. Ah, they're both ex-ninja. He replied. The embarrassing silence lasted a few minutes more. My mother used to be a Jounin-level kunoichi, Sasuke pressed on, she stopped to take care of her family. Shinka looked down on the ground for a moment, before replying. Both of my parents did the same thing. Why both? Sasuke asked, blinking. I don't know, Shinku shrugged. Probably, they thought that 2 was better than 1, or maybe my mother didn't want to risk my father dying on a mission or something and convinced him to drop out. I don't know, I never asked. Silence once more settled between the two. It was slightly less uncomfortable, but it was still there. 1 hour later, and Sasuke began to punch the wooden pole while grounding his teeth. Both of them, late. Sasuke hissed. What if it's contagious? This lateness, oh for the love of. Another punch, is Kakashi always going to be late like this? And what of the dobe? If she slept in I'm going to throttle her, I swear. Shinku awkwardly gazed away. Maybe, they had reasons. He hazarded. No reason should make anyone later than 5 minutes. If you risk being late, then just leave early. Sasuke shot back angrily, before returning to working on the pole with his fists. Shinku flinched at the tone, and then quietly sat down bringing his arms around his knees, with his back against his own wooden pole. Another hour passed by. Sasuke began to froth. Arg. Enough is enough. The Uchiha exclaimed, wringing his hands in the air. Let's spar, and then he turned towards Shinku. Shinku's eyes widened to giant saucers. You heard me. Come on, let's spar. But. I'm not going to hurt you, Sasuke rolled his eyes. Come on. Hesitantly, Shinku moved away from the safety of his wood pole, before gazing with fear etched in his eyes at the Rookie of the Year. This felt like being a pig sent to the slaughter. Maybe he could pass with the excuse of his shoulder hurting from the wound of the day before. He just had to, oh, right. He was supposed to shrug it off, so if he did that he'd just further lose any hint of acceptance. He didn't need to be told to understand this was just another test to see if he was worthy of the team or not. It was just like with the class. Clan children sat one next to the other, while civilians took their own rows. It was an unspoken rule. Do we really have to do this? Shinku asked, warily putting up a defensive stance. It's called training, Sasuke retorted. It's what training entails. Shouldn't we wait for? Shinku jumped back as a fist nearly came close to slam in his guts. Hey. Less talking, more fighting. Sasuke's leg came up next, bringing with it dust and dirt. Shinku brought both arms up, and soon a hand grabbed onto his left one before twisting it. He ended up feeling the ground beneath his feet disappear as he fell down like a bag of potatoes. Gah! Sasuke snorted. That was like 5 seconds. Shinku didn't answer. He just hissed and began to nurse his aching shoulder. The pain dully throbbed through his limb as he gently massaged his arm, before slowly stumbling back on his feet. I am not very good with taijutsu. I noticed, snorted Sasuke. I think you're better off staying way back. There's enough of the dobe and me acting like the frontline meat bags. Shinku breathed in deeply, before gazing once more around. Why was their sensei so late to begin with? Well, Sasuke commented, let's go again. You're never going to improve if you give up like this. Come on, hands back up. Shinku swallowed his nervousness. His left arm trembled slightly from the pain in his shoulder, but just as he hoped the stitch wouldn't open, a brutal blow came right against that very spot. He cried out in pain as he clutched the wounded area, falling on one knee. Didn't you go and get the wound healed at the hospital? Sasuke asked, his own eyes wide, as he got down on one knee next to him. Don't tell me you didn't. I did, Shinku murmured back, holding his tears of pain in the corner of his eyes. Gah, it's just, it hurts. Who healed it? Sasuke asked, pushing Shinku's jacket off him before pulling his shirt aside in the shoulder area. Who's the imbecile who thought stitching a shinobi's wound was the smart way to go? And why the hell didn't you stop him and get? Hey guys! Naruko exclaimed as she landed in front of the two, and then freezing. Oh, she blinked. Sorry if I'm interrupting. Sasuke and Shinku blinked at the same time, not understanding what she was speaking of, at least, until they stared at one another next. Sasuke had Shinku's jacket in his other hand and was pulling Shinku's shirt. The two of them were extremely close too. This isn't what your imbecilic mind can think of, Dobe. Sasuke yelled as he let go and jumped a few feet back, dropping Shinku's jacket on the ground. We were just training. Oh, Naruko smiled with a slightly lecherous grin. Just training, Checking the sizes of the... No, Sasuke snarled. We were not doing that. Sure, Naruko sing-sung, you were clearly trying to force poor Shinchan here to do something unspeakable. Naruko clicked her tongue while shaking her head. Always reading those perverted books got your head in the gutter, Yuki-chan. Why you, Sasuke growled. Why are you late to begin with, bimbo? I waited until a clone popped to warn me that Kakashi left his house, Naruko smiled brightly. So you said you were training? Not fair. I want to train with Shinchan too. Shinku did not like where it was going at all. Maybe after we take our first mission, Kakashi's voice came as a grace from the heavens themselves, the silver-haired Jounin walking closer to them with a lazy stroll. And if you hadn't been late, Naruko, you could have trained too. Naruko pouted. Kakashi just sighed and then began to walk once more towards the Hokage Tower. For a good first time, maybe he'd see if Tora was once more free and around Konoha. He was sure his students were going to love that little furred beast by the end of the day. Chapter 9, In Plain Sight Hide the Truth. The Yondaime personally assigned the missions. It was obvious, but when you were in the team with his daughter, things didn't exactly work out in the normal and common way. There was another flash. Muam. Naruko's high-pitched whine echoed through the room, as the red-haired woman who had presented herself as Naruko's mother took yet one more photo. Now come on, it's my baby's first mission to Bane. I have to get some photos of it. Naruko was actually red from head to toe. You're embarrassing me, Tabia. Shinku was the one who'd rather want to crawl in a hole and die. He just wanted to do a mission. The nervousness was killing him. What was he supposed to do? What would their first mission be about? He hoped it would be nothing complicated or above their level. Sure, his teammates were prodigies, but he wasn't. Now, Kushina, the Yondaime said kindly, Kakashi's already late as it is. Sniffle, the woman had tears in her eyes, my little Naru-chan's all grown up now. Let's go, Naruko grumbled, grabbing by the sleeve both Sasuke and him surprisingly before pulling them out of the room with Kakashi following them after waving goodbye. Naruko let go of his sleeve, as well as Sasuke's, once they were already way out of the tower. Kakashi slowly reached them, before bonking on the head Naruko with the mission scroll. Well then, the silver-haired Jounin said, here you go. Your first mission is to capture Tora. Shinku's eyes widened briefly. They had to capture a tiger? No, even more, there was a tiger free somewhere? Maybe a circus? Was there even a circus in Konoha? What? Kakashi nii. That's unfair. Naruko whined, I heard about him from Dad. Why are you punishing us, First of all, it's Kakashi-sensei, the Jounin remarked. Secondly, it is punishment. You arrived late today, didn't you? But. Naruko stuttered. Dobe, so it's your fault then. Sasuke snarled. That, I heard no one captured that cat in less than an hour. Shinku swallowed. Then, he blinked. Cat. He muttered. He exhaled the next instant. It was just a cat. 2 hours and a half later, with his face bleeding and his sleeves torn, he would not be calling that thing just a cat any longer. Still, he had managed to corner the feline in a dead end and the rest of the team was converging on the position. The small radio in his ear buzzed with Naruko's voice. OHI. You got him cornered, Shin-chan. Yes, he exhaled deeply, holding his arms wide as he slowly took a step forward. The cat hissed. Shinku showed his teeth back. Hold him there, Sasuke's voice came next. We're coming. The cat hissed, showing its claws. Good kitty, Shinku murmured, trying a smile. Nice kitty, he added, keeping his hands ready. If only he had a bag of sorts, the job would be over far faster. Tora jumped once more. The cat's claws aimed at his face, and Shinku instinctively brought his hands up. This time, instead of ending up with his forearms to shreds because of the cat's onslaught, his knuckles punched the animal straight in the face. It was an accident, but Tora the cat ended up sprawled on the floor meowing softly. Blinking, Shinka lowered his forearms. He kneeled next to the downed cat the next instant, grabbing a hold of it by the sides and lifting it up. Ah, he exhaled, holding on to the knocked-out cold beast. I got him, he chuckled. I got him. Tora woke up in the next second, and finding itself trapped within a pair of arms, it began to bite in a bid for freedom. Shinka ground his teeth. The bites of a cat weren't extremely painful, but they did hurt and it was as if the cat knew how to make them hurt more. Shinka keeled over, falling on the ground with his knees as he hissed in pain trying to hold the cat down. Blood droplets fell from his arms, but as long as he held on to the cat then the mission was successful. He was the dead last on many things. But he would hold that cat within his arms even if it killed him. Ah! He heard Naruko's shrill scream from the start of the alley. Shin-chan! You didn't have to kill it. He turned, grimacing as he held on to the thing. I've got it, he weakly said. His arms looked flailed, to say the least. Even holding the cat by the neck didn't stop it from scratching with its rear paws, and whenever it could it would bite at his fingers or hands. The effect was pretty bloody, but the cat remained unscathed. I'll hold it, Naruko said, moving closer and grabbing the cat by the scuff of the neck. She smiled then, sweetly, towards Tora. Naruko's right arm began to move fast up and down, as the cat meowed in shock from the way she spun the limb as if she was going to throw the creature in the air. It sounds like a siren. Naruko chuckled as the cat went meow while spinning. You think if I slam him a bit against the wall he'll feel it? I don't think we should, Shinka stammered out. Isn't it, the daimyo's cat? Ah, well, she can always get another, Naruko shrugged as she stopped mistreating the animal, who actually retched out its breakfast. Now listen here, Furball, the girl said, looking straight in the eyes of the cat. You run away again and I swear next time I'll really fling you against a wall, understood? The cat meowed, nodding strongly as it began to sweat. Good, and now apologize to Shin-chan. Just because he's the dead last doesn't mean you get to be mean to him. The cat actually meowed again in Shinka's direction, with pleading eyes. Naruko snorted with a knowing nod, before grabbing a gentler hold of the cat. There, that's how you do it, Shin-chan. If the animal feels your fear then he's going to give you a hard time. Just like fighting sharks, kick their faces and they'll pipe down. Fighting sharks. Naruko blinked. You never fought one? They're pretty common around Uzashigagakure's shores. I've never been out of Konoha, Shinka replied, his eyes slowly traveling down to his bleeding arms. Using his index finger and his thumb, he began to pull backwards his sleeves. Really, had the beast steel claws? It had managed to rend through his clothes with ease, as if they were made of paper. Once we finish doing these boring D ranks we'll get a C rank 1. Those are always out of the village and it's going to be fun. It will be like camping, only you go on a trip somewhere else and sometimes you've got to risk your neck doing a mission or another. Naruko nodded to herself, bringing her right hand to her chin as she used her left to mark the important passages. Then there's the B ranks and the A ranks, until you reach the S ranks which are cage-level missions or only for highly specialized shinobi. Suzuki jumped down next to them the next moment. Shinku, the Uchiha said. Where is the cat? Shinku blinked. Isn't it? He then looked towards Naruko, who looked down at her two free hands. The girl's shoulders began to tremble as she realized she had let the cat go. Dope? The cat. OHI. It's not my fault. Well, maybe it is, but it's not completely my fault. I was explaining mission ranks to Shin-chan. Suzuki snorted, and then he gazed back towards Shinku's arms. Are you trying to set a record for most hospital visits in a week? Kakashi appeared then, holding Tora the cat by the neck and with a bored expression etched on what little of his face was visible. It's getting late, and I have better things to do than wait for you lot to capture the cat. He flung Tora at Suzuki, who grabbed it firmly. So deliver the cat back and then see you all in training ground 7, at 5 o'clock this afternoon. He looked towards the sky. You have 2 hours to go eat something somewhere. With that said, he disappeared in a flicker of leaves. Naruko eyed the cat murderously, before mimicking slicing its neck. Tora actually meowed for help, holding on to Sasuke's shoulders as if he were his savior. You better be sorry, Naruko hissed. You better be. Let's deliver the cat and then go somewhere to eat, Sasuke deadpanned. Last one to the Hokage Tower pays for everyone. Naruko yelled aloud, before flickering away. Wait, dope. Sasuke snarled, before growling as he looked back towards Shinku. You don't know the Shunshin, do you? Shinku shook his head. Ah, Sasuke exhaled loudly. Fine. Let's go, and with that, the Uchiha began to walk, quietly followed by Shinku who kept nursing his arms. You should get those checked at the hospital, Sasuke said along the way. Just go in and. Sasuke-sama, an elderly voice said, stopping the Uchiha on his tracks. Always doing a good action, the voice belonged to an old woman, who seemed to own a stall with fruit on it. Come get an apple, it's free of charge for you and your friend. I'm sorry, but we're on a hurry, Sasuke replied curtly, before beginning to walk once more. Shinku followed quickly, but... Sasuke-sama. Sasuke-sama. Sasuke-kun. Sasuke-sama. Shinku actually lost sight of Sasuke halfway through a small crowd of women and girls that formed around him, and in the end, he remained alone at the side of the road. There really was no sign of Sasuke anymore, even when the crowd parted way. A blonde-haired boy calmly stopped right next to him. He was holding Tora the cat in his arms, and his eyes were darkly gazing at the crowd. This is why I don't usually walk on the streets, he muttered, people everywhere. If you want to go ahead. Shinku began, only for Sasuke to snort. No thanks, I know how much Naruko eats. I'm not letting you lose without at least a fair chance at the competition. Thanks. You're welcome. Shinku mentally sighed in relief. Maybe he was just overthinking it all. He wasn't being pushed away by his teammates, it just happened that probably, he didn't speak loud enough to be heard. He just had to soldier on. His arms hurt, but eventually they'd stop hurting. If all days ended up like this one after all, what was the worst that could happen? Chapter 10, Get Ready to Suffer. Are you gay, Sasuke? Naruko asked pointedly, staring straight in the eyes of the Uchiha. I find your method of hazing horrible, dope, Sasuke replied firmly. I know how much you eat, he remarked. And I'm not going to stand by and watch when my police instincts tell me when there's to right or wrong. Naruko grumbled looking away, her arms crossed in front of her chest. Just you wait until he starts asking you favors, she said. I'm not going to trust him for a long time. There's a difference, dope, between not trusting someone and hazing him. What next? You're going to have him carry your stuff. Naruko's eyes shone for a moment. It's not a bad idea, she remarked, not a bad idea at all. It was then that the hospital room opened up, to let out an arm-bandaged Shinku Harano. He awkwardly smiled as he slowly walked near them. Ah, seems I'll be fine by tomorrow, he acquiesced. No chakra healing, again. You've got something against it. Sasuke retorted. And no, it's just the medic said they keep it for the emergencies or the dangerous wounds, training wounds are nothing to worry about, Shinku was quick in answering. Sasuke frowned, before grounding his teeth and giving a curt nod of understanding. OHI. Let's move, exclaimed Naruko, I'm already hungry to be a. You're always hungry, bimbo, Sasuke snorted. You're an endless pit. The moment you'll grow fat and begin to roll, I'll tie a chain to your mouth and use you as a wrecking ball. Naruko snickered back, before slapping her rear. A girl doesn't get fat, she gets curves. If you're actually a girl I'm a yaoi lover, Sasuke stated plainly. She looked from him to Shinku with an appraising glance. The next moment, she winced as Sasuke's fist collided with her head. Really? Sasuke exclaimed. Ichiraku ramen then. Let's go or we're going to be late. And with that, Naruko fist pumped and flickered away the moment she was out of the hospital. Sasuke followed with a flicker of his own, and Shinku, well, Shinku walked. The streets, so late during the day, had people returning home or families coming back from the park. Ichiraku's ramen wasn't that far away from the hospital, but in the time it took for him to reach it, he found himself in a line. He couldn't see his teammates, and he certainly couldn't hear them. Maybe they had seen the line and gone elsewhere, or maybe they had just stepped inside before. As it was, he was glad when the line finally dwindled down and it was his turn to order. "Take away only," the girl at the counter said with a bubbly smile. "All seats taken," she added then. The counter indeed brimmed with shinobi and civilians alike, and the place was packed with other people waiting for their own turn. "Pork ramen," he said, paying, and then patiently waiting his turn for the takeaway cup and chopsticks. As he walked out, once more in the middle of the road, he began to frown and gaze upwards. It wasn't yet 7 o'clock. He didn't want to think badly about it, but really, hadn't the other two just upped and disappeared? He reached training ground 7 with an hour to spare, and as he sat down with his back resting against the wooden pole that practically was his, he sighed. At least the ramen was still warm by the time he snapped the chopsticks and began to eat. Sasuke Uchiha watched from a nearby tree the scene, and then turned his gaze towards Nariko. "Happy now?" Nariko huffed, shaking her head. "It means nothing. Just because he remained in line means nothing." She had a bag of takeaway ramen in her arms, as she slowly opened another cup to eat. Sasuke rolled his eyes, holding on to his own. "I don't know how you managed to rope me in on this." "Well, I told you we were going to be late if we didn't hurry. That's why you moved all the way till here," Nariko remarked. "And eating on a tree is common enough in the shinobi force, better than chairs for some." "You could wave at him at least," Sasuke pointed out, eyeing Shinku down below. "Nope," Nariko replied with a shrug. "He's a genin, not a toddler. Frankly, I'd be angry already at being stood up. He'll just forgive us because we're awesome and he's not, and then you'll see I was right. Or maybe he's really just shy, and you're acting like a Turayo bully," Sasuke deadpanned. "You are saying you're sorry about leaving without waiting for him." "Meh," Nariko muttered. "It's all your fault anyway, Yuki-chan. If you had just run ahead, then he'd have ended up paying the ramen. As it was, I couldn't let him leech off you. From the smell, I'd say a pork ramen isn't leeching off as much as simply having the same thing he had the last time we went there." "Details," Nariko rolled her eyes. "Leeches and fleas are everywhere. You need to be careful on who to trust, or you'll just get hurt in the end." "You're reaching paranoia levels, dope," Sasuke replied. "Just look at him. He wouldn't hurt a fly. You remember Hinata?" Nariko retorted. "Shy and meek, but in the end it was her father's will to get her close to us. She just used us to get in his good graces. Is that why you stopped talking to her?" "Like Ino, the bitch," Nariko continued, wanting to be best friends forever, lasted until a guy came close enough for her to swoon over. When the guy came onto me, then she began listing my defects," Nariko snorted. "And there's Kiba who's a mutt in heat, then there's Shikamaru who's just a lazy smartass. I heard him say, troublesome, she gets nice marks with little effort because of her surname, Tabia." "You sure he said that?" "Something similar to his mother," Nariko muttered. "I'm sure he just needs someone to talk with, and then you'll see how he opens up and starts spewing his I'm in the team with the two prodigies, please lick my shoes or something like that. You understand I'm an Uchiha, and I was trained in profiling like any other Uchiha in the police force," Sasuke remarked. "And if I tell you he doesn't strike me like that type, I'll just say you need to stop being a nuke and open your damn eyes." "Trust me, duckbutt," she mumbled. "I'm going to prove he's just a leech, even if it's the last thing I do to Bia." Sasuke sighed. There was no way he'd manage to convince Nariko she was wrong. The girl always had to end up head first against walls before she learned how to avoid them. He finished his own ramen, and then flickered down in front of Shinku. "Sorry," Sasuke said as he appeared in front of the startled boy. "There were so many people we just ordered and then dashed off. We couldn't wait for you there because they kept pestering us." Shinku just awkwardly nodded, while Nariko appeared a second later still scarfing down on her ramen. "Yup. Shori Shinshin. Don't speak with your mouth full, dope," Sasuke snarled. Kakashi Hatake appeared at 7 o'clock precise in front of his team, holding on to a single backpack. "Very well, team. Follow me." As the man began to walk, and the genin followed, Shinku had a bad feeling. The feeling intensified the more they walked towards the borders of the village, and by the time they passed the gates, he actually began to sweat. "Ohi, Kakashi nii? Where the hell are we going?" Naruto asked, warily looking at the sun dying over the horizon. "To a fun place," Kakashi replied jovially. "I'll make sure to get you all trained up. If I have to stop being a freeloader, then I want you all to feel a bit of my despair." Fufufu. Did he just go fufufu on us? Sasuke whispered to Naruto. I think he snapped. Naruto swallowed hard. Isn't this way the one for? Then Kakashi stopped, bringing his right arm up to gesture at a tall fence gate. "Welcome to your home away from home for the next month. Rather than let you waste your time on boring D-ranks, the Hokage and I came up with a solution to challenge both the two prodigies and ensure team building." Shinku felt suddenly very afraid. "Your parents were forewarned, of course," Kakashi added then, "but as you're all genin now, you're all my little soldiers. If I want to train you on boiling lava, then I'll do just that." "Kakashi nii, don't you think you're taking things too far?" Naruto said then hesitantly. You said something," Kakashi replied, holding on to his Ika Gore Fest 2000. The Jounin stopped in front of a gate with a black 4 painted on its surface. "This, here, is training ground 44? Naruto blinked. "No," she said quite firmly. "This is kidnapping," Sasuke deadpanned. Shinku just kept on swallowing his saliva. "Also known as the training ground of death. And for an entire month, instead of doing stupid D-ranks, you will have to survive in here. There's no better teacher than life itself, no better education than being left alone and unsupervised in the middle of the most dangerous stretch of forest around Konoha. And frankly, it gives me free time to do more important stuff. So that's your reason," Sasuke screamed, pointing a finger at Kakashi. "You lazy bastard." "Meh," Kakashi shrugged. "You've all received enough training to be well-fit veteran genin," the Jounin commented, "and frankly, pulling Shinku up to par wouldn't help team building, so, it's your call. Train him or leave him as he is. In 1 month of time I'll come back." "This doesn't have anything to do with Ero Sennin's latest book coming out tomorrow, right Kakashi nii?" Naruto asked quietly. "If I were you I'd move inside while there's still some light," Kakashi cheerfully added. "But then again," he clapped his hands, "if I did that then you'd find the way out in less than a month." Kaka, a fist slammed in Naruto's guts, knocking the girl out before the silver-haired lunatic brought his other hand down on Sasuke's neck. Then, the last thing Shinku saw was a fist coming straight for his forehead. His last thought was that he wanted to go home. Check the description for the links to the author.